Welcome back into your regularly scheduled CyHawk talk with Ben Hutchins and all. We're back in the swing of things. We got a Sunday show in. We have a Wednesday show in. There's two games this weekend. All is right in the world. Maybe not. But Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Ethan. I'm really well. And I think the Cyclones are happy to be back in the swing of things too. After that loss, first loss of the year, you don't really know how they're going to bounce back or whatever. And it certainly seems like a week of practice at least had everybody feeling good, talking it up, saying we've kind of flushed it when we talked to those guys on Tuesday. Nothing like getting back out there in the pads, I think, to forget about that 23-22 loss last week.
I have unfortunately had 3 weeks of coverage like that so far, so I know what you're talking about. But yeah, sounds like the Cyclones are going to be a resilient bunch from your reporting. One of the big things that they need to get solved is kind of figuring out how to prevent teams from starting off on the right foot, getting in the end zone, getting a field goal on the first drive. What'd you hear from the defense and how they want to start games a little bit stronger?
It is just the most confounding thing. Maybe people smarter than me, with more ball knowledge than me, can explain why the top ranked scoring defense in the Big 12, which is, of course, the Iowa State Cyclones, has allowed a team to go right down the field in 4 straight games and score a touchdown on the opening drive. I pretty much asked defensive coordinator John Hickok, what's up with that when we got him on Tuesday? And, well, it's not great. He said it is a problem and stuff, but he tries to keep a little bit of a larger perspective. Pointed out, hey, if you stop them on the first drive, but then they go score on the second drive, score is still 7-0. But it is a trend that the Kansas Jayhawks are going to look to exploit. KU has scored opening points in 6 of its 8 games this season. So I'm looking to see if the mentality, which is what we hear from a lot of defensive players. We just need to get that first drive mentality right, is going to be out there. Coach Campbell offered the explanation, our base defense at this point in the season is pretty set. Opponents have a chance to kind of scheme us up a little bit. And also, like last week against Texas Tech, we just got outplayed. Jonathan Cooper just got picked on a 23-yard touchdown. So a lot of factors that could explain that confounding problem.
And they had a chance to win the game. Like they had that field goal that was missed, and it was obviously not great conditions, but it's not like they got dominated in that game, right? So when you're kind of, I know teams hate moral victories, fans especially hate moral victories, but thinking about kind of the message that you heard was given in the locker room after the game. Do you think that's something that's kind of setting in and helping with the mentality as they approach this next game?
Yeah, I think so, Ethan. I don't think there's a lack of confidence or a lack of belief, in the system, in the process, which you hear every coach talk about, but certainly Matt Campbell. And the message from Iowa State's postgame locker room, Ethan, and I had this as something we can talk about is Jaylin Noel, the senior leader who's gonna go down as one of the best receivers in Iowa State history, but has been through a heck of a lot. He's lost at least 6 games in all 3 years and 8 1 season. So he got up and Rocco Beck told us Jaylin got up after the game and said, hey, in my time at Iowa State, we've never overcome this adversity. So what are we going to do about it? And that message seemed to have resonated. Talked with Tyler Moore, who said, hey, Jaylin, he'll get up there and his voice, it kind of crackles, it kind of wavers. He gets into it. He's passionate about it. And Jaylin Noel said, hey, if I feel like there's something that needs to be said, then I will go up there and say it. So I'm interested to see how his kind of message of let's overcome adversity. I think that's going to translate to if they can minimize the mistakes and minimize all the self-inflicted wounds we talked about. But that was the message from the senior leader.
He's going to go down as one of the best wide receivers in Iowa State history, but he's robbing. I saw this from
Yeah.
you either Saturday or Sunday that Jaylin Noel is Robin and Jaden Higgins is Batman. Explain yourself.
Robin goes down as one of the best DC superheroes in history, I think, right? I mean, there's no disrespect to Robin. Robin's good too, but in the last few games, Ethan, I can't help but think the Batman is Jaden Higgins. He's been the guy on third down. He's been the guy on fourth down. Of course, he had the touchdown streak that we talked about. Um, I just think the connection with Rocco Becht and Jaden Higgins is something that they've really even built on since last year. And I think he is the option 1A. That's my take. I mean, that's no disrespect to Robin, but got to call out Batman. I think in that story I said when the crime goes up, when it's third and 10 and the crime is out the window, only one symbol gets flashed in the sky, and it's the Batman sign.
Well, when I started covering the Cyclones a little bit last year, just very briefly, it was Jaylin Noel and then a young stud running back were kind of the two big skill position players that I knew about going into that. And you want to talk about that other guy that I heard about, who I thought coming into the year was going to be the leader of that three-headed monster backfield you've talked about a ton. Sounds like he might be emerging as that leader. Talk about Abu Sama and what's kind of developed of late for him.
Ethan, it's so interesting because at the start of the season, Abu was the guy, and it just kind of phased out a little bit. He's been part of this three-man running back rotation where practice, Matt Campbell tells us, is really what determines who's going to get the bulk of the carries, at least in the start of the game. And that's been a challenge. That's something that Abu revealed to us this season is, yeah, it's not this season hasn't gone the way I kind of pictured it in terms of his workload and his leading that backfield. And it's been a challenge, just a mental, physical challenge to kind of overcome. But with the three-man running back committee, the cycle eventually kind of turns around. And right now it's Abu, who had I wouldn't say it was his best game of the season, but it was certainly his second best game of the season, probably behind that Houston game. Matt Campbell said Abu probably played one of the most complete games he's seen in his years at Iowa State. So I think with Carson Hansen still a little beat up and Jalen Jackson, Action Jackson, Ethan, kind of just running into some walls. I don't know if it's a blocking thing, but Action Jackson has been less action in the last few weeks. So I think the running back cycle is going around. Right now, it's Abu Salma's turn, and he definitely kind of turned some heads, I think, especially my head last week. And right now, it's Salma's backfield.
And then one last thing, you did a story last week on a linebacker. I remember covering Rylan Barnes in high school. I think I got him for one state championship game. Um, and they've kind of had a revolving door. I'm not going to say it's like a three-headed monster because it's been mostly injuries at linebacker, if I'm correct. But give me the 15-second elevator pitch on why I should read that story because I haven't gotten to it yet. But why should I carve out a little bit of time for that story?
Well, anybody, and this doesn't include you, but anybody from Britt, Iowa, a small town in northern Iowa, is going to want to read that story because Rylan Barnes was a beloved player for those high school teams you covered, Ethan. And he came to Iowa State, walked on with just the goal of, hey, I want to play some special teams this season. I want to make the travel roster. And about 3 weeks into the season, his goals really got changed when all of these injuries ravaged Iowa State's linebacker room. No longer was he just trying to make the travel roster. Rylan Barnes was trying to tackle guys in Houston to get Matt Campbell's program record setting win. So he said it's been a complete mentality shift where he's had to revamp his expectations and he's been ready for it. Rylan Barnes has been one of the better linebackers for Iowa State this season. And just a general point on all of these things is I think it's going to be really helpful later on for the Cyclones who might not benefit as much from the linebacker, the young guys getting all that experience this year, but next year, the following year, I think you're going to see a lot of depth in that area.
I've been to Britt, Iowa one time, covered the West Hancock girls basketball team losing to South Central Calhoun in the 2022 girls state basketball playoffs. They had pretty good offense, pretty good defense that year, and they just kind of ran into a hot team on the wrong night. It was a very windy that day. My car door closed on my head, so that hurt. And then I had the coldest McDonald's French fries of all time at the Clear Lake McDonald's that night. So um, I can't say I had an amazing visit to Britt, but it was a nice place when I was there.
The detail with which you just described your visit to Britt, Iowa from a couple years ago is incredibly impressive, Ethan.
Yeah, well, I'll never forget it was like the wind was like it felt like it was 100 miles per hour because
Mhm.
it blew my car door shut on my head. Like I had the car door open and I was like trying to get my backpack out and just like just smoked me on the way close. It was quite the weather experience.
You know what that weather does not sound like at all? The weather in Pasadena, California at the Rose Bowl, where the Iowa Hawkeyes are going to go fly out there this year. Wow. Big Ten matchup, UCLA and Iowa. That
Just
long
a
feud
classic
rivalry.
conference matchup, right? You always think like you think Big Ten, it's like, oh, UCLA and those gold helmets, the powder blues, and the Iowa Tiger Hawk. It is classic Big Ten matchup here this weekend.
What do you think? Is there what's the Rose Bowl going to be like? You think a lot of Iowa fans are going to make the pilgrimage out there, or what do you think it'll be?
Well, I'm not quite sure who's all going to make this thousand mile plus trip to Southern California, but Kirk Ferentz will tell you whoever makes it out there as a fan is going to see significantly more of the city than the Hawkeyes. They're going to go airport, hotel, stadium, hotel, airport, or maybe I added an extra stop at the hotel there, but they're not going to see much of Los Angeles. Jay Higgins says you're not going to see the Hawks walking through downtown. They're there on a business trip. It's going to be all serious, all business. So they're not going to see much of it. The one thing that they did talk about though was getting to play in that iconic venue of the Rose Bowl. Iowa has not had a great run of success at the Rose Bowl of late. They've lost their last four games in that venue. And you probably remember Christian McCaffrey going crazy in the Rose Bowl in 2016, following the 2015 regular season, where he ended up leading Stanford to a win over Iowa. That was the last time Iowa played in that historic venue. So they're kind of trying to snap a 66-year long losing streak in the venue. It's not the bowl game. The last four games were the bowl game. This time it's not the bowl game. So that's kind of what's at stake this weekend, if you will.
That's a long time, and I'm sure it'll get broken as those two teams will travel and crisscross the country to play a few more times coming up. You wrote a nice story about Zach Ortwerth, Ethan, the tight end, Iowa tight end, such an important position that has had so many guys go to the next level and do great things. What's up with the latest Iowa tight end?
Glad you caught that in the 30 minutes before we started recording because it just posted right before we started here. But Zach, real nice young man from St. Louis. We talked to him on Tuesday. He's kind of in the last both of the last 2 years kind of found himself on the field thanks to injury. And while he's wishes his teammates had a little bit better injury luck, he's taking full advantage of his opportunities. He's listed as the number one tight end on the depth chart for the game against UCLA on Friday, and he's just kind of taking advantage of every opportunity. That's kind of his mentality. Coach Ferentz said, he's not an athletic freak. He's not a 4'4" guy. He's not 270 pounds. So he's not some massive, big, strong tight end. He's not a speedy tight end. But he just gets it done. He's consistent. He's reliable. And that's allowed him to build trust with both Cade McNamara first. He had a nice diving grab in the Illinois State win. And then with Brendan Sullivan, where he had a 52-yard reception this last Saturday, which led to a touchdown and kind of allowed Iowa to put that game to bed. So he's taking advantage of these opportunities by being super reliable, super consistent, and to make it even that much more impressive for a guy who's only in his second year in the program to be doing all this. It's really only his fifth year of football. He couldn't start playing football until he was a freshman in high school. His dad had a rule that he couldn't start until he was in high school, and that was a rule that his dad's dad set for him, for his dad. So
Wow.
he's only been playing football for 5 years. You're doing the math right now. You're saying 4 years of high school, 2 years of college. Ethan, that's 6. Well, he actually got hurt his sophomore year of high school, so he missed that year as well. So he's still super early on in his development. So there could be a lot more for him to grow into over his next 2.5 years with the Hawkeyes. So I think that's something to make people excited and to even make it sound even more impressive. When asked about the rule that his dad had, he said, well, it worked out for my dad because he ended up playing college football at Drake. And his grandpa, who set the rule, played football at Mizzou. So these are guys who understand football well, know what it takes. And so he's coming from the right place with that rule. And Zach certainly getting a first class education on football, even though he didn't play Pop Warner or middle school ball.
So how did Zach fill his time? Was it flag football or basketball or wrestling? What did he do?
He mainly played basketball. He said he didn't lack for things to do, is what he said. But basketball was kind of his first sport, and then the offer started rolling in for football, so he figured he should pursue that at the next level.
Seems like he's certainly made the wise choice to this point. We've talked a lot about this Iowa offensive line. You pointed out, hey, they've been making holes where anybody in the Iowa backfield that can run through. How'd they get to that point? Because it wasn't always like this with the offensive line.
Yeah, I think any Hawkeye fan who's not been living under a rock for the last couple of years, even me, who I wouldn't say I am a Hawkeye fan, but I followed the team because I lived in Iowa. It wasn't good the last couple of years. And 2 years ago, they averaged less than 3 yards per carry. Last year, they averaged 3.3 yards per carry. They're just not getting any push for the ground game. They're not opening up any holes. They only had 3 games over 5 yards per carry in the last 2 years. This year, all but one game has been over 5 yards per carry. And the one game that they weren't, they were at like 4.8 yards. I can't remember the stat exactly, but it was the Ohio State game. So they still they still come out looking significantly better than they have the last couple of years. And when we asked Coach Ferentz about this on Tuesday, he related it to a the experience of a former Iowa offensive lineman in Marshall Yanda. He ended up being a all pro player, Super Bowl champion with the Ravens, 8-time pro bowler, I believe. So this is a guy who ended up having a ton of success in his football career, but there were times where he was benched. There were times where he struggled to find a spot during his football career, and he delivered this message to the Hawkeyes last week when he was the honorary captain for the Wisconsin game. And he just kind of said, I was molded by failure. I didn't let my failure destroy me. I let it shape me into somebody who was going to find success. And that's kind of how Ferentz described the offensive line, who he felt was going to have a good year, felt that they had the potential to have a good year, even though they've struggled in the last 2 years because they've been molded by this failure. They finally have experience across the board. He talked all offseason about how you can't microwave experience was his line. And that was true. The offensive line struggled when they were young. Now that they're veteran, across the board, all 5 spots are veteran. They're having a ton of success, and so that's what we're seeing is that this offensive line has come through their trials and tribulations and come out stronger.
No, don't ever doubt the old man strength that comes with a few extra years and a little bit more experience on the football side of things. And eventually, Ethan, this podcast, CyHawk Talk, will become a basketball show. But right now, we're kind of, I guess, just forced to kind of mentioning what's going on. Successful opening campaigns for Iowa State men and women, along with the Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa State men beat Mississippi Valley State handily. The women beat Chicago State. Things also kind of held serve in Iowa.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the Iowa women's basketball team can still hoop to the chagrin of Cheryl Swoops. I'm sure they can still put the basketball through the hoop in Iowa City. It wasn't fraudulent last year when they were having a little bit of success. It wasn't all Caitlin. It was a lot Caitlin, but Iowa is still a quality basketball team to the media and coaches who disrespected them in that Big Ten poll. Back to back national championship appearances, and they're outside the top 5 in the Big Ten. Call me crazy. I don't think that's going to happen. They're still good. Their season openers tonight. I'll be there, so be sure to check out qctimes.com for our coverage there. I'll have a nice photo gallery so you can see kind of what it looked like, and then I'll tell you about it in a takeaways with a little bit of what happened in the game as well. So just wanted to put that out there. The Lady Hawks, they can still hoop.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? We'll go ahead and get into our Sunday's headlines today, right after this. Welcome back to CyHawk Talk. Time for our Sunday's headlines today, where Ben and I try and predict what the news is going to be on Sunday once all the dust has settled from Saturday's Iowa State clash with Kansas and Iowa's Friday clash with UCLA. Ben, get us started with your top headline.
I think arrow-headed in the right direction will be the headline after the Cyclones beat Kansas in Arrowhead Field, of course. I think the Cyclones are in the right mentality. I don't think I think the discipline and attention to detail has. If Matt Kimball's said that to the media, it feels like 25 times. I can only imagine how often those guys have heard it in practice this week. So I do think that the Cyclones are going to take care of those little things leading to a win, and it's going to be in Arrowhead Stadium because of the ongoing renovations at Kansas's home football stadium. So Jaylin Noel, super excited to play in that stadium. He grew up a Chiefs fan from Kansas City. And I think that's going to lead into the next headline, from fan to the man. Jaylin Noel will lead the Cyclones out of this adversity that they've been feeling. It means something when a senior leader like that gets up to the locker room and just kind of pours his heart out, says, "Hey, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of, having 6 losses and these losses rolling into another loss." I think Jaylin Noel is bringing a sort of intensity that will have to show up on the football field. He grew up sitting in the seats watching the Chiefs play. So I think Jaylin Noel, Robin, is going to have a good night fighting the crime. And the last thing is a scenario that I could see happening that perhaps the Cyclone fans don't want to see. If KU's going to win this game, it's going to be because Devin Neal, the running back, goes crazy. Iowa State's defense, if it has a couple weaknesses, you look at that first drive, and then you look at the rushing defense. In the Big 12, Iowa State's number 13, giving up 165.1 rushing yards a game. Certainly something that you're going to have to be watching for with Devin Neal, who's been one of the Big 12's better running backs for a while now. The worst game he's had this season is 4.1 yards per carry. Most of the time, he's up above 5, up above 6. So Devin Neal will be the guy if the Kansas Jayhawks are going to win this game, and it'll be Neal before Devin, the headline.
Yeah, and the arrow you're talking about that'll be headed in the right direction is obviously the arrow on the playoff-ometer, which is the ending segment of our Sunday show that you need to make sure you tune into, where Ben tries to predict or gauges the playoff odds of the Cyclones playoff-ometer with the wrong direction for the first time this year last week. Hopefully it's headed back in the right direction. Sounds like 2 of those headlines would imply that, one of them would not. But we'll find out. I do a significantly lamer version of the playoff-ometer now that Iowa is eliminated, which is the QB spectrum, and I think we're going to get some answers that way this weekend. But I think the back that we're going to be paying attention to on Friday are the linebackers. Number one headline for me is Battle of the Backers. UCLA, Iowa showcases top 2 linebackers in the Big Ten, possibly in college football. Obviously, Iowa fans know about Higgins. He was the number 1 linebacker in college football by basically every metric except for the Butkus Award last year. This year, he's once again near the top. He's number 2 in Pro Football Focus's player grades. And he leads the Big Ten in tackling with 94 total tackles. But number 2 on that list is Carson Schweissinger from UCLA. He's got 85 total tackles, and he got a lot of praise from Kirk Ferentz on Tuesday. He said he's a good football player. He can play, and you'd better have him accounted for each and every play. So this is a guy that's going to be become well known to Hawkeye fans, almost as well known as Higgins. During the game on Friday, expect is going to make a lot of plays. And he's not as well respected by Pro Football Focus in grades. He's still among the top 15 in the Big Ten, but he's not within the top 50 nationally. So I think this could be a real statement game for Schlesinger, especially when you consider the fact that this is a run-heavy team in Iowa. So he's going to have a lot of opportunities to pad those tackle numbers, I imagine.
Ethan,
Number
as a
two,
Denver Broncos fan, oh, sorry. As a Denver Broncos fan, your next headline is a way to my heart.
I don't know the reference here quite honestly, but the number two one is no fly zone. Iowa secondary quiets the red hot Bruins passing attack. When you look at the last two games for UCLA, where they've picked up two wins in enemy territory at Rutgers and at Nebraska, Ethan Garbers, the quarterback for the Bruins, has had incredible games. He's averaging over 300 yards in both of those games. I think he's at 303 yards per game and three touchdowns in those two wins. And so he's just been electric. He's been super efficient with the ball. He's completing 77.8% of his passes in those wins. He's also getting it done on the ground. He has combined over 100 yards and a touchdown with his legs in those two games. So he's really getting it done, but it's more with his arm. I think that a revitalized, re-energized Iowa secondary led by Jamari Harris, Quinn Schulte, Xavier Nwapa, and Deshaun Lee, who had a great game against Wisconsin. He's been maligned all year, but he had a great game against Wisconsin, got his first career interception. I think they're going to shut down the Bruins passing attack. And then rounding it out, all Rosy. Hawkeyes win first matchup inside the Rose Bowl in 66 years. We don't do predictions on this show. Here's a prediction for you. Iowa's going to win. UCLA's strong right now, but they benefited a lot from a really bad performance by Nebraska last week. A lot of mistakes from Nebraska. That's not Iowa's game. Iowa is a mistake-free team. They figured out the penalties after the first drive on Saturday, where there was about 700 penalties called on both teams. Iowa cleaned it up. It's been nothing but. Brendan Sullivan has been mistake-free under center for the Hawkeyes. I think Iowa's going to come out with a win and get their first win inside the Rose Bowl stadium, not the game, but the stadium in 66 years.
That's good stuff. I'll give you some homework. Study up on Aqib Talib and Chris Harris, the architects of the Denver Broncos no-fly zone in the
I'm
Super
familiar
Bowl.
with Aqib Talib. Didn't he play for New England for a little while?
Yeah, snatched a chain from Michael Crabtree. He's a little bit of a name that people remember.
Well, I'll go ahead and look that up and I'll give you the full report on Sunday when we reconvene from the Sunday Rewind show. Maybe I'll keep it to just the Hawkeyes and Ben will keep it to just the Cyclones. But you'll have to tune into the show to find out. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like the show, please rate us. If you're listening to the audio podcast, I should say, please rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, where we are now available. Thanks for watching.